When we think about what keeps planes flying safely, pilots often come to mind first.
Yeah, you do, yeah.
But there's this whole crucial team on the ground, the aircraft mechanics. Their expertise is just, well, fundamental.
Absolutely foundational.
So for you, our listener, who wants to get the essentials quickly without getting totally bogged down, we're doing a deep dive today. We're looking into FAA mechanic certifications. That's 14 CFR Part 65.
Exactly. And this isn't just, reading regulations aloud.
No.
It's about really understanding the bedrock of aviation maintenance in the U.S. We're going to unpack what it really takes,
To become a certified mechanic.
Yeah, what they do, the responsibilities, the principles behind it all.
Okay.
And today we're focusing just on mechanics. We'll save other airman roles for another time.
Gotcha. And right off the bat, let's maybe clear something up. There's mechanic and there's repairman. They're different, aren't they?
They are, and it's a really important distinction to make early on.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Mechanic versus repairman.
Think about it like professional mobility, a mechanic certificate. That's personal. You earn it through training, knowledge tests. It travels with you.
Right. So I get certified. I can take that certificate to different jobs.
Precisely. Now, a repairman certificate, that also needs training and knowledge, but it's tied to a specific company.
Oh.
And even a specific location. The certificate itself often lists the address where they're allowed to work.
Wow. Okay. So much more localized then. What happens if a repairman leaves that company?
That's the key difference. When they leave that job, the one that sponsored the certificate, that certificate has to be returned to the FAA. They can't just take it with them to the next place.
Okay, that makes a difference. Crystal clear. All right, so that's sorted. Let's get into actually becoming a certified mechanic then. Subpart A of Part 65 covers the general stuff, right?
It does. Section 65.3 lays out the basic eligibility.
What are the main points there?
Generally, you need to be a U.S. citizen or a resident alien living here. But there's an interesting exception. If the FAA decides it's needed for, say, maintaining a U.S. registered plane that's operating outside the U.S., they can issue a certificate to someone who meets all the other requirements, even if they aren't a citizen or resident.
Oh, that's interesting. So keeping U.S. planes flying abroad can open a door. What about actually applying? The process itself.
Right. That's Section 65.11. The form you need is FAA Form 861002, Airman Certificate and Door Rating Application.
8610, there are two.
Got it. And there are a couple of important catches here.
Like what?
Well, if your current mechanic certificate is suspended, you can't apply for any additional ratings during that suspension.
Makes sense.
And if your certificate has been revoked, totally taken away, there's a mandatory 1-year waiting period before you can even apply for a new one.
Wow, 1 year. Shows they take it seriously. Accountability.
Exactly. And speaking of serious, Section 65.12 talks about the impact of certain offenses, particularly drug-related ones.
Yeah, I saw that. Given how safety critical this job is, that sounds really important.
It is. If someone's convicted of violating federal or state drug laws, and that's broad, growing, processing, selling, transporting narcotics, marijuana, stimulants, their application for a mechanic certificate or rating can be denied for up to 1 year after that conviction.
Okay.
And any certificates they already hold, those could be suspended or even revoked.
So zero tolerance, pretty much.
Yeah.
You need a clear head for this work.
Absolutely. The FAA's stance is firm because clear judgment and reliability are just paramount.
Okay. So let's say someone gets through the application, passes their initial tests. Do they get the full certificate right away?
Not quite immediately. Section 65.13 covers temporary certificates.
Temporary, yeah.
Yeah. If you pass all the required tests, minimum score is 70%, you can get a temporary certificate.
How long is that good for?
Maximum of 120 days. During that time, the FAA does a full review of your application, all the documents, before they issue the permanent one. Think of it like a final check, a probationary period while they dot the I's and cross the T's.
Provides a buffer for the FAA. Makes sense. Our source also brings up security disqualification. Section 65.14. I imagine that's a big deal these days.
It really is. This came in after 9/11. It lets the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, determine if an applicant might be a security threat.
And if they are?
If the TSA makes that determination, the FAA can put your application on hold or even revoke any existing certificate you might have.
Wow. So safety and security are really intertwined in the regs.
Absolutely. It's a multi-layered approach.
So how long do these mechanic certificates actually last? Do they expire every few years?
Good question. Section 65.15 says they stay effective until one of three things happens.
Okay.
Either you voluntarily surrender it, the FAA temporarily suspends it for some violation, or the FAA permanently revokes it.
So unlike my driver's license, it doesn't just run out on a specific date.
Exactly. It takes an active event, an FAA action, or you giving it up for it to become invalid.
What if something simple happens, like you change your name legally, or you lose the certificate, or it gets damaged?
Section 65.16 covers that. For a name change, you send your current certificate plus official proof like a marriage certificate or court order to the FAA Airman Certification Branch.
Where's that?
Oklahoma City. Seems to be the hub for this stuff. Same process, basically. If you need a replacement for a lost or destroyed one, send the request there.
Okay.
And the source mentions there's usually a small fee for the replacement.
Right. Oklahoma City. Good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now the core stuff, the testing. What does that involve?
Sections 65.17, 65.19, 65.19 deal with testing. The FAA designates specific people to administer the tests.
Right.
And like we said, minimum passing score is 70%.
Okay.
Now, Section 65.18 is pretty strict about cheating or any unauthorized conduct during the written exams.
I bet. What counts as cheating?
Things like copying, sharing test info, getting someone else to take it for you, using cheat sheets or unauthorized aids.
Standard stuff, yeah.
The penalties are serious, though. If you get caught, you could be banned for a whole year from applying for any certificate or rating.
A year?
And they could suspend or revoke any ratings you already have. They really want to protect the integrity of the process.
Makes total sense. What if someone just doesn't pass, fails the test first time?
Section 65.19 covers retesting. You've got two main options.
Okay.
Option 1, just wait 30 days. Gives you time to study more, then try again.
Or
Option 2, get documented additional instruction, specifically in the areas you failed.
from who?
From a certified mechanic. They need to give you a signed statement saying you've had the instruction and they think you're ready to retest.
So either time or targeted learning. It's about proving you actually know the stuff.
Exactly. It emphasizes competence before you get certified.
Our source also really hammers home the consequences of falsification in Section 65.20. Sounds critical.
Oh, absolutely critical. If you knowingly make false statements on applications, logbooks, reports, any required records,
Yeah.
or if you fraudulently reproduce or alter a certificate, that can lead straight to suspension or revocation of any FAA certificates or ratings you hold.
So lying on paperwork is a huge deal.
Huge. The FAA stresses that accurate documentation is fundamental to safe aircraft operation. They take a very dim view of any funny business with records. It all ties back to the integrity of the whole system.
It really does. Even something mundane like changing your address, Section 65.21 has a rule.
Yep. If you permanently move, you have 30 days to tell the FAA Airman Certification Branch in Oklahoma City, in writing, your new address.
Just keeping the record straight.
Pretty much. Seems minor, but important for their communications.
And finally, under these general rules, there's refusing drug or alcohol tests. Reinforces that earlier point about sobriety.
Indeed. If a mechanic refuses a required drug test under Part 120, Section 120.15, or an alcohol breath test under 120.37.
What happens?
Big consequences. Denial of any new certificates or ratings you're applying for, and suspension or revocation of any you already have.
And Part 120 lists when those tests are required.
Yeah, it covers things like pre-employment, random testing, post-accident, reasonable cause, return to duty, all those scenarios for maintenance personnel.
So the FAA's message is clear. Stay clean, stay fit for duty, or risk your career.
Absolutely. Given the safety implications, their policy is stringent and unwavering.
Okay, that paints a really clear picture of the general requirements and the high standards involved. Let's shift now into Subpart D, the specifics for the mechanic certification itself. Section 65.71 starts with eligibility again. Anything new here?
There's some overlap, but also key specifics for mechanics. Minimum age is 18.
Okay.
And you have to be proficient in English. Read, write, speak, understand it.
What if you're not, but you work for a U.S. airline overseas?
Ah, good point. There's a note about that. If you meet that criteria employed outside the U.S. by a U.S. carrier, your certificate gets an endorsement saying valid only outside the United States.
Interesting. What else?
Crucially, all your required tests, written, oral, and practical, must be passed within a 24-month period before you apply.
2 years. Okay, so the knowledge has to be reasonably fresh.
Exactly. And of course, you have to show you have the knowledge and skill for the specific rating you want, airframe or power plant.
And if you already have one rating, say airframe, and want to add power plant later,
you need to meet the experience requirements, which we'll get to, and pass all the relevant tests for the new rating within that same 24-month window. Keeps everything current.
Got it. Section 65.73 then lists the actual ratings.
Yep. Two main ones, airframe and power plant.
Usually called A&P, right? When people have both.
That's the most common, yeah. Airframe and power plant combined, you can get them individually, but most aim for the A&P.
Any historical curves?
There is, actually, a grandfathering clause. If someone held an older aircraft or aircraft engine E certificate before June 15, 1952, and it was valid then, they can exchange it for the corresponding modern certificate. So an old A&E becomes today's A&P. Little nod to history.
Cool. What about the knowledge needed? Section 65.75.
Right, knowledge requirements. Once you meet the experience rules, you have to pass written tests, minimum 70%.
How many tests for the full A&P?
3 separate ones. General, that's basic aviation stuff. Airframe structures, systems, and power plant engines, props, components.
What kind of topics?
They cover aircraft construction, maintenance, the relevant regs like parts 43 and 91. And for power plant, you need to know propeller principles, installation, maintenance.
Okay, and you have to pass these written tests before the other tests?
Correct. Written exams come first. Then you move on to the oral and practical tests, which are covered in Section 65.79. It's a logical sequence. Prove you know it, then prove you can do it.
Makes sense. Knowledge first, then skills. And you mentioned experience requirements in Section 65.77.
Right.
You can't just pass the test, right? You need hands-on time.
Exactly right. You need one of two things. Either a completion certificate from an FAA-certificated aviation maintenance technician school, an AMTS under Part 147.
Like going to A&P school.
Precisely. Or you need documented proof of practical, hands-on experience.
How much experience?
Minimum 18 months for either airframe or power plant. If you're going for both ratings, the A&P, you need a total of 30 months.
18 or 30 months. That's a serious commitment. Ensures you've actually worked on planes.
Definitely. It guarantees real-world understanding.
So after the written tests and the experience comes the skill check. Section 65.79, the oral and practical tests, what do they involve?
These are designed to really see if you have the basic knowledge and the hands-on skills needed for the certificate or rating you're after.
Done after the written exams, you said?
Yes. And for the power plant rating specifically, the practical test includes showing you can do minor repairs and alterations on propellers.
How do you know what they'll test you on?
The FAA publishes guides called Aviation Mechanic Practical Test Standards, the PTS. They're on the FAA website.
Okay.
They clearly spell out the knowledge areas and skills the examiner will evaluate. So it's not just theory. You have to demonstrate you can do the work safely and correctly.
Show your work, basically. Competence in action. Now, Section 65.80 mentions something specific for students still in AMTS programs.
Yeah, there's a provision there. If a student in a Part 147 school is making satisfactory progress, good grades, good attendance, that sort of thing, they can actually take the oral and practical tests before finishing the whole curriculum and even before taking the written exams.
Really? That seems backwards.
It can be an advantage for really strong students who are moving fast. Lets them potentially get into the workforce a bit sooner, assuming they meet the FAA's progress criteria.
Interesting. An accelerated path for some? Okay, so someone jumped through all the hoops, passes everything, gets certified. What can they actually do? Section 65.81 covers privileges and limitations.
Right. Once certified, a mechanic can perform or supervise maintenance, preventive maintenance, or alterations on aircraft or appliances for which they're rated.
But there are limits.
Big ones. They cannot do major repairs or major alterations on propellers.
Okay.
And they can't work on aircraft instruments. Those jobs are generally for certificated repairmen working at specialized authorized repair stations.
Gotcha. What about supervising?
You can only supervise work that you yourself have previously performed satisfactorily.
So you can't supervise something you've never actually done yourself.
Exactly. It emphasizes the need for actual experience. The source stresses that even after school and tests, a new mechanic is just starting. They need ongoing learning, mentorship, or carefully doing tasks themselves.
And using the manuals.
Crucially important. Always need access to and understanding of the relevant maintenance manuals and instructions for any job. Continuous learning and knowing your limits are key for safety.
So always learning. Stay in your lane. Section 65.83 adds another layer. recent experience. You can't just sit on your certificate forever without using it, right?
That's correct. To actually exercise the privileges of your certificate to sign off on work, you need recent experience.
How recent? How much?
At least 6 months of relevant work experience within the preceding 24 months.
6 months in the last 2 years. What kind of work counts?
It can be actually working as a mechanic under your certificate, or technically supervising other mechanics, or even holding an executive job overseeing maintenance.
As long as you're actively involved somehow.
Right. It ensures mechanics out there working on planes have current practical knowledge and skills, vital for safety.
Absolutely makes sense. Okay, let's break down the privileges for each rating. Section 65.85 for airframe. What can an airframe mechanic do?
With an airframe rating, you can approve and return to service minor repairs or minor alterations on airframes, appliances, related parts.
If you did the work yourself.
If you performed it, supervised it directly, or inspected it carefully, yes.
What about major repairs or alterations?
You can perform the work involved in major repairs or alterations. You can fill out the FAA Form 337 that documents it.
But you can't sign it off.
Not the final return to service, no. That approval needs an A&P mechanic who also holds an inspection authorization, or IA. We'll get to the IA soon.
Okay. What else for airframe?
They can perform 100-hour inspections on airframes.
Got it. Any special rules?
Yes, for light sport aircraft with special airworthiness certs not built under standard FAA production approval. An airframe mechanic can approve major repairs or alterations on those, but only if the work followed the manufacturer's instructions or other FAA-accepted data.
Okay, specific rules for specific aircraft types. Makes sense. Now, Section 65.87 for the power plant rating. Is it pretty similar?
Very similar structure, yes, for power plants and propellers.
So minor repairs and alterations they can perform and sign off.
Correct. Approve for return to service.
Major repairs and alterations. Perform the work, but need an IA for the final sign-off.
Exactly. Same deal. They initiate the Form 337, but the IA does the return to service approval.
Can they do 100-hour inspections?
Yes, specifically on power plants and propellers.
And the same light sport aircraft provision applies?
Yes, for power plants and propellers on those aircraft not produced under FAA approval. Major work needs to follow manufacturer or FAA instructions for the sign-off. The consistency makes the rules easier to follow across ratings.
Yeah, that framework helps. Lastly, in this part, Section 65.89, displaying your certificate, where do you keep it?
You need to keep your official certificate readily available right there in your immediate work area.
So, on you or nearby?
Pretty much, where you normally exercise your certificate privileges. And you have to show it if asked.
Asked by who?
By the FAA, an authorized rep from the NTSB, or any federal, state, or local law enforcement officer. It's your professional ID, basically. Needs to be handy when you're working.
Like a badge of authority, almost. Okay, that covers the basic A&P. Let's talk about the next level, the inspection authorization, the IA. Section 65.91 kicks this off. What's the big deal about getting an IA?
The IA is a pretty significant step up for an A&P mechanic. It gives you the authority to do more complex inspections, like annuals, and crucially, to approve major repairs and major alterations for return to service.
So it unlocks those sign-offs we mentioned earlier. What do you need to be eligible?
Section 65.91 lays it out. First, you need to have held your A&P certificate for at least 3 years.
Okay.
And you must have been actively working under it for at least the 2 years right before you apply. So 3 years total, 2 years active recently.
Got it. What else?
You apply using FAA Form 86101. You need a fixed base of operation, a place where you can be reached during normal work hours. Doesn't have to be where you do the work, just a contact point.
All right.
You also need access to the right equipment, facilities, and, very importantly, the current inspection data needed for whatever you'll be inspecting and approving.
Makes sense. You need the tools and the info.
And then there's another test, a comprehensive written or computerized test. Minimum score 70%.
What's this test cover?
It really digs into your ability to determine if an aircraft is airworthy after a major repair, major alteration, or an annual or progressive inspection.
Sounds tougher than the A&P tests.
It is. And here's a key difference. If you fail the IA test, there's a mandatory 90-day waiting period before you can retest. No shortcuts, no getting extra training to shorten that wait time like with the A&P tests.
90 days. Wow, they definitely set a high bar for the IA.
They certainly do. It's a position of significant trust and responsibility.
So once you get the IA, how long is it good for? Is it permanent like the A&P?
No, it's different. Section 65.92 says IAs expire on March 31st of each odd-numbered year. So every 2 years, essentially.
Okay, so it needs renewal.
Yes, and critically, you can only use your IA privileges if your underlying mechanic certificate is also current and effective.
Ah, they're linked.
Absolutely. And the IA also becomes invalid if you surrender it, if it gets suspended or revoked, if you lose that fixed base of operation, or if you no longer have the required facilities, equipment, or data.
And if it's suspended or revoked, you have to send it back.
Yes. Return it to the FAA upon request. The periodic expiration keeps things current.
Right. So how do you renew it then?
Yeah.
Section 65.93 seems to list several ways.
Yeah, there are multiple paths to renewal each year to meet the requirement for that March 31st deadline.
Such as?
Okay, one way is activity-based. You could perform at least one annual inspection for every 90 days you held the IA, or inspect at least 2 major repairs or major alterations per 90-day period. Doesn't matter if you approve them or not, just that you inspected them.
Okay, what else?
You could perform or directly supervise and approve at least one progressive inspection cycle.
So staying active with inspections is key. Any other ways?
Yes, training. You can attend and successfully complete an FAA-accepted IA refresher course. Needs to be at least 8 hours long.
Who offers those?
The FAA sometimes, or various industry organizations. Lots of options there.
And one more.
Finally, you can pass an oral test given by an FAA inspector, basically proving you're still up to date on the rules and standards.
Interesting. What if you just got your IA, like, right before the expiration date?
Good point. If you've held it for less than 90 days before March 31st, you don't need to meet these renewal requirements for that first short period.
Okay, and can you mix and match these renewal methods, like do one annual and one major repair inspection?
No, the source clarifies that. While the number of inspections needed is cumulative over the year, you can't mix the types of activities within a single 90-day period for renewal credit.
Gotcha. And the oral test with the FAA inspector. Sounds maybe intimidating.
The source actually encourages viewing it positively, as a professional discussion, not an interrogation. It's a valid way to show you're current. These varied options help ensure IAs stay knowledgeable and engaged.
Okay, so staying active, staying current. What specific powers does the IA grant according to Section 65.95?
Holding an IA lets you perform annual inspections.
Right, the big one most private planes need.
Exactly. And perform or supervise progressive inspections. And as we discussed, approve major repairs or major alterations for return to service.
On most aircraft.
On almost all aircraft. The main exception is large airliners, basically aircraft maintained under a continuous airworthiness program, like in Part 121 operations.
Yeah. Okay, and do they have to keep the IA certificate handy too?
Yes, same rule as the mechanic certificate. Keep it available for inspection by the aircraft owner, other AMPs, the FAA, NTSB, law enforcement.
And if they move their fixed base of operation?
They have to notify the local FAA Flight Standards District Office, the FSDO, in the new location in writing before they start exercising IA privileges there.
Good practice to tell the old FSDO too, maybe.
The source suggests that, yeah, just good communication with the FAA.
Okay, so the IA is a serious endorsement. Big responsibility, big authority. Now, the source material takes a significant turn here into something vital. Ethics. It starts with a definition.
Yeah, it defines ethics as the study of standards of conduct and moral judgment. Mentions the Greek root ethos, meaning character or custom.
And it notes this is specifically about ethics for maintenance techs, right?
Exactly. While ethics applies everywhere in business, the focus here is on situations relevant to aircraft maintenance work. It's a specialized context.
It then gives a pretty vivid scenario about repairing a fuselage ice shield. Sounds like it could really happen.
It does. The scenario involves a tech at an airline replacing a damaged ice shield. Computer says the part's in stock, so they remove the damaged one. But, oops, inventory error. The part isn't actually there.
Oh boy. What then?
The company inspector tells the tech to just put the old damaged one back on.
Which you can't do, right? Remove damaged part is unairworthy.
Correct. The tech rightly refuses. So the inspector says, okay, repair it here. Tech says, we're not authorized for that kind of structural repair here.
Standing his ground. Good.
Inspector pushes again. Just use epoxy, sand it, paint it over, like a temporary patch.
Whoa.
Tech refuses again. Won't compromise safety standards.
So what happened?
The inspector found another technician who was willing to do the dodgy epoxy repair, and the aircraft was sent out, unairworthy.
That is deeply concerning. What are the takeaways from that story?
Several critical points. One, the intense schedule pressure in airlines can push people towards shortcuts.
Yeah.
Two, even small errors like inventory mistakes can snowball into ethical dilemmas. Three, The inspector in this case either didn't know the rules or just didn't care about proper procedures.
And someone else went along with it.
Sadly, yes. Which suggests maybe a lack of awareness or commitment to safety standards in that second tech, too. It highlights potential systemic problems.
The source then makes a key point about company culture being crucial for ethics.
Absolutely fundamental. It emphasizes that a strong organizational culture has to actively promote ethical behavior and consistently discourage unethical actions.
Top-down commitment.
All levels of management need to buy in so everyone, employees, customers, even competitors, sees the company stands for something ethically.
It also mentioned unethical competition.
Yeah, things like bait-and-switch tactics, lowballing bids, or promising impossible deadlines just to get the work.
And then jacking up prices or taking forever.
Exactly. The source strongly warns technicians against working for places that operate like that because it creates pressure to cut corners to meet those unrealistic promises. A solid ethical culture is a buffer against that.
It also talks about how people might rationalize unethical choices. What are those common excuses?
Several are listed, like pretending it's not really unethical or illegal.
Denial.
Or believing it's somehow in the company's best interest or even your own career's best interest.
Self-justification.
Assuming nobody will ever find out.
Risky.
And maybe the worst one, expecting your bosses will protect you if things go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
The source gives a sharp warning there. Managers who encourage shortcuts might later deny they ever knew anything about it if the proverbial hits the fan. Individual accountability is key.
Good warning. Then there's the B.F. Goodrich aircraft brake scandal example. A famous case. How does that relate to maintenance?
Well, that case was about designing and testing brakes for the Air Force. A young technician testing them found they kept failing specs. But he faced intense pressure from senior management and engineer who didn't like his design questioned. A manager determined to pass no matter what, to falsify the results and certify the faulty brakes. The ethical issues were intimidation, dismissing test failures, a culture of fear and distrust.
And the parallels to maintenance.
Direct parallels. Imagine a tech pressured by a supervisor to sign off unsafe work, or a shop using unapproved procedures when a component fails a test, or just that culture of intimidation silencing anyone who speaks up.
So the pressure to conform can be immense.
Immensely. The Goodrich case really highlights the need for personal ethics and the courage to blow the whistle on unsafe or unethical practices, even when it's hard. Organizational pressure can really test your integrity.
It really drives home how these dilemmas can pop up anywhere in aviation. So how do we build a better ethical climate?
Trust is foundational, the source says. Trust within the organization, trust with customers. It boosts morale, productivity, relationships.
No.
Ethically strong places actively value dissenting opinions. They encourage open discussion, even debate about policies and practices.
Not just yes men.
Exactly. They also mention positive trends like more ethics courses in schools and better corporate codes of ethics.
Is there like a practical checklist for making ethical decisions?
Yes. A 7-step one is offered. 1. Recognize and clarify the dilemma. 2. Get all the facts.
Okay.
3. List your options. 4. Test each option. Is it legal? Is it right? Who benefits? Who gets hurt?
Right. The consequences.
5. Make your decision. 6. Double check it. Use the family newspaper test. Would you tell your family? Would you want it on the front page?
Good gut check. And 7.
Take action based on your ethical choice. It provides a solid framework for thinking through tough spots.
Finally, the source brings up the PMA Code of Ethics, Professional Aviation Maintenance Association. What are its core ideas?
It really frames the technician's work as a vital public service. Huge responsibility to the government, to the flying public.
Okay.
It demands unwavering integrity, performing work to the highest ethical principles.
Because lives are on the line.
Directly. It says safety and lives depend on their skill and judgment.
Yeah.
So never expose others to risks you wouldn't take yourself. Never do work beyond your knowledge or ability. Actively resist pressure to approve an unsafe aircraft.
Sand verb.
And flat out reject bribes or any undue influence. The card ends with a pledge to stick to these ethics for the good of aviation and the profession's dignity. It's a powerful ethical compass.
That PMA code really sums up the weight of responsibility and just how critical ethics are for every single mechanic.
Yeah.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main things you hope our listener takes away?
I think the big picture is that becoming a certified FAA mechanic, especially getting that IA, It's tough. It demands a mix, solid technical knowledge, practical skill, understanding complex rules, and maybe most importantly, an unwavering ethical compass.
Yeah.
We sorted out the key difference between the mechanic cert portable, personal, and the repairman cert tied to a job.
Right.
Understanding your specific privileges and limitations for each rating, and the extra responsibility of the IA, that's absolutely critical.
And the ethics thread running through it all.
Exactly. As the example showed, ethics isn't just fluff. It's fundamental to safety and public trust. The whole system really hinges on the integrity of the people doing the work.
And a final thought for you, our listener. Given how high the stakes are in aviation safety, how could the industry maybe find new ways to make ethical decision-making even stronger for maintenance folks?
Good question.
Or maybe, thinking broader, what lessons can other technical fields where safety is also crucial learn from the strict standards and ethical focus we see in aviation maintenance? Something to chew on, perhaps.
Definitely worth pondering. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into FAA mechanic certifications.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
We hope it gave you a clearer picture of this really vital part of aviation safety. Feel free to explore the sources more and let us know what topics you'd like us to tackle next time.
Until our next deep dive, keep thinking critically and keep those ethical principles front and center.